most of the history that we learn today was whitewashed. But when they say history was whitewashed, what do they mean by this? Is whitewashing only limited to historical figures, or is there more to this concern? So history has often been subject to interpretation and manipulation by those in power to serve their own interests. It's been whitewashed, changed, and reinvented to fit particular narratives, ideologies, or to justify certain actions. This can also include downplaying or omitting certain events, exaggerating accomplishments, or framing events in a biased manner. And what that simply means is that what you might have been taught about history wasn't what I was taught about history. In fact, it wasn't even what our ancestors were taught. And as if that isn't enough, that also means that every generation can have their own version of a historical phenomenon that took place thousands of years ago, which means the historical perspectives can differ depending on who you ask and which generation they come from. But all in all, do you think whitewashing history has unbearable implications as other people tend to make it sound like? Leave your thoughts in the comments.
Whole whitewashing history. When they say, well, we shouldn't make little white kids feel bad. What? It's history. Why can't white kids learn about slavery, Native American genocide? Why can't we teach that? Why is that bad? It's part of history.
There's this whole thing that is a part of the white experience. And it is that when something makes a white person feel uncomfortable,
right,
everybody shushes it up.
Right.
It's like, no, let's not talk about that. And then when we talk about slavery, it's like, no, that makes us uncomfortable.
So I had to remake this video because I put it up and I'm trying to make it shorter. But you said you don't remember them talking about slavery or Africa in school. I don't know how old you are, what generation, if you're a boomer or if you're Gen X. But I talked to both sets of my grandparents and I asked them about what they learned in school. And this is what they had to say. They didn't teach you about the actual slavery until you got...
They didn't teach us nothing about black culture. I took that when I went to college. I took black history. I took black culture when I went into college. And that's when they first opened it up about black history. So you should have seen all the students in that auditorium trying to sign up for black history. It was new.
In college. So it was new, so about 1967, 1968, 1969 about when you went to college?
Yes, around that time, yeah.
Now that was my mother's mother. Now these are my father's parents. Do y'all remember what y'all's history curriculum was in primary school, like elementary school and middle school and high school? What they taught you guys in history class?
Social studies.
Yeah, what they taught you guys in social studies?
Yeah, that was kind of like, I guess, the history thing.
Did they teach you about slavery in Africa in elementary school and high school when you went to school in Maryland?
If it was very limited.
Very limited? Because I was asking... I was asking my grandparents, because I called Grandma Helen the other day, and she said she remembered they didn't teach about that curriculum didn't come until the late 60s, and she said she didn't pick it up until college because they didn't teach it to her in school. But she went to school in New Jersey, and y'all went to school in Maryland, so I was going to see if there was a difference in curriculum.
Oh, yeah. New Jersey was a bit more...
Oh yeah, because she went to school in the city up north, and I'm guessing where y'all went to school was like more the countryside.
Yeah, and that's when in the book the African continent was made a little smaller than America.
Also, these schools got integrated in the mid-50s. So both my grandma from Jersey and my grandparents from Maryland, they were going to school with white kids, with white people. And my grandma up in Jersey City, where she went to school, she said they didn't teach her about Africa or the Atlantic slave trade. That didn't hit the schools until after she graduated high school, and she had to take it in college. And everybody was rushing in to take it. All the black people were rushing in to take this new African curriculum and African American history curriculum, right? And then my grandparents, they went down to school and Westsker, Maryland, down in the countryside. They don't remember too much about Africa, the transatlantic slave trade, and it being very limited, right? Nobody think that's peculiar. Nobody think that smells funny. Nobody thinks that's weird. Like, we're all African, right? All the black people in the Western Hemisphere, all the black people in the world, they come from Africa, right? Slavery started from Africa in the 1500s, early 1500s, and it went up until the 1870s, even though slavery was abolished in 1865. Slavery was abolished in 1865. Why did it take 100 years for Africa and the transatlantic slave trade to reach the school curriculum in the late 1960s? Like, listen to this. Slavery got abolished in 1865. We're all from Africa, right? But it wasn't in the schools in 1870, 1890, 1900, 1910, 20, 30, 40, 50. It wasn't until the 1960s, almost 1970, that entered the history curriculum in the school curriculums. In the United States of America, where the slavery was happening, where they were taking Africans from Africa and bringing them here. And it didn't touch the schools or the history classes until the 1960s. And then if y'all listen to my Nana, she said back then when she was in school in the 50s and 60s, on the maps, America, North America, the United States was depicted as bigger than Africa. I wonder why that is. And you know what's funny? I'm now on the side of the internet where I'm receiving information and evidence that life didn't even start in Africa. Life started in America. Mesoamerica, all that shit. The pyramids here. Mummies here. Mounds here. The Nile River here. The Mississippi. Yeah, I'm down that rabbit hole and researching that. All life started in the Americas. And everybody left here. And now it's funny that my grandma said on the maps back then, when she was in school, Africa was smaller than the Americas on the map. It was smaller than North America, the United States. But that's another conversation. But like I said, my grandparents are boomers. I'm Gen Z. So I've been learning about slavery since I can remember. Since preschool. Kindergarten, first grade, third grade, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, 11th, 12th, all the way through. Slavery's been drilled into my brain before I can even remember. But our parents, the boomers, they didn't know about Africa. They didn't know about slavery until the 1960s. Till it hit the colleges. Till it hit the school systems in almost the 1970s. You know what that sounds like to me? That sounds like people trying to rewrite history. People trying to fabricate and change history. That to me sounds like an agenda. People tell me I'm working for the government. I'm trying to divide the black community. I'm trying to deceive people. The whole time it's them. We've always been from Africa, right? They've been taking slaves and bringing them to America since the 1500s, since the 16th century. Why in the would they not start teaching that in schools until the 1960s, when slavery got abolished in the United States 100 years prior? It's like nobody thinks, bruh. Nobody asks these questions. But that's okay. People keep calling me dumb. People keep calling me ashamed to be African and self-hating. People keep telling me I'm trying to do indigenous eraser and steal a Native American. I want to be Native American so bad and I don't want to be African. It's not about not wanting to be African. It's not even about wanting to be indigenous. It's about the truth. And it's about lies. It's about history being changed, and it's about an agenda. But like I said, people are gonna chastise me and make fun of me, but I don't care. My grandparents just told me back then they weren't taught about Africa or slavery. My grandma said that shit didn't hit the scene until almost the 1970s. And then my nana said on the maps back then, before it changed, America was bigger than Africa.
So, did you hear what Florida State Representative Alex Andrade said about slavery? Yeah, in defending a new law that bans teaching about systemic racism, he said slavery was bad, But
if we can't have an honest discussion and say that some slaves were paid for their work, then we're afraid of teaching accurate history.
Well, seems like this guy isn't satisfied with the fact that Florida already teaches its students that some enslaved people benefited from slavery because they learned some skills. Nope. He wants people to know that some enslaved people were paid for their work. Do you get the feeling that Florida's just a few years away from teaching that slavery was just a paid internship? So here's the thing. It is true that in some rare instances, some enslaved people were allowed to earn very small amounts of money. But let's be clear here. This was a tactic of exploitation and control used by slaveholders. basically to incentivize hard work and obedience. And again, it was a very rare practice. So the reason this dude wants Florida kids to learn that some enslaved people were paid is that it makes slavery appear more benign and less cruel. Yeah, they were enslaved, but some of them got paid. Just like that white representative in Kentucky who recently claimed that her white father, born in the 20th century, had been a slave. And yes, I made a video about that, which you totally should check out. History's important, people. That's why some are out there trying to sell us a twisted version of it. So be vigilant and don't buy it.
One of the arguments you hear in opposition to talking to young children or to teaching elementary level school children about race, the history of America, the argument goes something along the lines of, well, you're going to make white kids feel bad about being white. What is your response to that?
Well, I would say those people are most concerned about our teaching of slavery. So let's just talk about slavery.
Sure.
If we teach white kids about slavery, we're going to teach them that there were white people who enslaved people and there were black people who were enslaved. And we're also going to teach them that there were white people and black people who challenged and fought against slavery. And so my question back to them would be, why can't we allow white children to identify with white abolitionists? And also, it demonstrates to me that these folks recognize that kids are not colorblind and that how we shape the curriculum impacts our children. So then why aren't they concerned about how black kids feel when they're not represented in the curriculum?
Slavery is as old as time and has taken place in every corner of the world, even amongst the people I just left. Being taken as a slave is better than being killed. Before you judge, you must ask yourself, what did the culture and society of the time treat as no big...
Okay, holy crap. That video is terrible. It's a video from PragerU, and if you've never heard of that, consider yourself lucky thus far, but I'm about to ruin that. Despite the U in its name, PragerU is not a university, nor is it educational. It's right-wing propaganda, framed as educational, to brainwash people into dragging our country back to, apparently, a time when enslaving people was considered no big deal. The video is part of Ron DeSantis' new anti-woke school curriculum in which AP psychology is banned, apparently, and slavery was no big deal. It was more like a jobs program. One of the guidelines actually in the curriculum is teaching how slaves develop skills which, in some instances, could be applied for their personal benefit. Whew. Ron DeSantis doubled down on that by saying enslaved people eventually parlayed, being a blacksmith into doing things later in life. Except if you read any factual history about the time, and not just the propaganda that Pudding Fingers is trying to put out, you'll learn that even after slavery was abolished, once Rutherford B. Hayes took enforcement troops out of the South, they immediately created Jim Crow laws to prevent formerly enslaved people from advancement or independence. Critical race theory, the idea of looking through history through a lens of acknowledging the harms on enslaved people and other marginalized peoples, is spun by critics who usually either don't understand it or are pretending not to. It's spun by those critics as making white kids feel bad about themselves. But whitewashing and gaslighting history, like DeSantis is doing, is how we make the mistakes that we've already made without learning from them. Germany has educational content about the Holocaust, and they talk about how bad the Nazis were. They don't try to frame it as some of it was good. They acknowledge the atrocities and the impact that they had. We don't have slavery or Jim Crow laws technically anymore, but we have the American prison system, we have other forms of ingrained institutional racism, and we have judges who interpret the Constitution in a way that they can keep people of color down. If you love your country, you should be willing to criticize both its history and its present in order to improve it. Ron DeSantis and his pro-Columbus propaganda are not the way we move forward.
You and I both know that depending on how you tell the story, you can either obscure the truth or tell a story in a way that distorts it and prevents a certain group from appearing to be good or prevents a certain bad group to appear as if they are the good ones, right? So the powerful have often done this with history by whitewashing it, changing it, and reinventing it to suit their needs, simply to manipulate the masses and even suppress them, or even exert their power over them and control them into doing certain things that serve the powerful. So with that in mind, the history that we were taught was used to serve the needs of those in power, right? To keep them in power even after generations. So their ancestors presented the history in a way that would put their descendants in a high position. Maybe that's the reason why certain groups of people don't want to get a DNA test, because they want the truth to be obscured. They don't want it to come out. Certain people have inherited land that didn't belong to them. Like at this point, nobody really knows whether they're indigenous Americans, were Indian, or they were black people. As of last fall, 25 states had passed 64 laws altering what students can learn. These laws whitewash history by limiting what educators are permitted to teach about race, ethnicity, and American history. Laws also restrict teachers from discussing gender identity and LGBTQ issues. In addition, individual school districts are passing policies to restrict education and ban books on these topics. A current example of how this effort denies children or young ones an honest education is Florida's Stop Walk Act, which effectively prevents students from learning about brutal periods in America's past. The law prohibits teaching that causes students, by implication, palm-color students to feel personal responsibility, guilt, anguish, or other forms of psychological distress. They're simply doing this to protect the palm-color students from feeling bad. But what about the black students though? Laws that require educators to teach distorted versions of history and refrain from open and factual dialogues endanger democracy and ignore the interconnectedness between human dignity and rule of law. This connection was affirmed by the American Bar Association in 2019 by a resolution urging governments to ensure that identity rights, the principle that human dignity is fundamental to all areas of law and policy, be reflected in the exercise of their legislative, executive, and judicial functions. Yet, in implementing the Stop Walk Act, Florida's Department of Education updated its standards in ways that promote false narratives that have no place in the education of America's next generation. For example, the DOE diminishes the barbaric consequences of slavery and perpetuates a historical fiction by requiring schools to teach about the various duties and trades performed by slaves, including how slaves developed skills, which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. This immorally suggests a world where skills learned while one is legally another's property, providing forced labor at the hands of a whip, could be comparable to skills taught through education and paycheck. It also ignores the many developed skills of the individuals abducted from their homes and staffed into ships as part of the slave trade. So basically, they've passed down this law that prohibits young ones from learning true history, but it teaches them a distorted version of history so as to prevent them from feeling guilt or feeling bad, especially palm-color people, of course, from feeling bad about their ancestors' implications of slavery, right? So they're trying to sideline the implications of slavery by saying that it was good for slaves because they acquired skills. But the other thing is, they're forgetting that these skills were acquired on the basis of force, on the basis of brutal means. The standards, however, leave teachers without any guidance as to the amount of detail they are allowed to present without running afoul of the law and risking their jobs. So imagine trying to teach history and you're grappling whether you should teach these students the history that they should learn, or maybe you should just dilute it. So that basically means they haven't presented a sort of syllabus for the teachers to be able to teach. So some teachers might just risk their jobs in trying to teach something they feel that it's diluted, when in fact it's considered as saturated to the system. Will they be admonished for stepping over the line in teaching about the ruthlessness of palm-color leaders who conspire to maintain the social order and advance the cause of palm-color supremacy by unaliving black people and torching their homes and businesses? Will educators fear distressing students by teaching how palm-color leaders disfranchised blacks, propagated stories about alleged essays on palm-color women, and fomented fears of crime by black men, prompting palm-color mobs to attack, where they describe self-defense against the unaliving as acts of violence by African Americans. This leaves a lot of gaps for questions, right? This movement by state governments to promote fictitious history, prohibit the teaching of historical facts, and prevent open dialogue on sensitive issues invalidates the experiences of others and repudiates their dignity and value. It also denies the role of the structural impact of art-assist and the state-sponsored violence in shaping the history development of the United States, which continues to permit many of today's institutions. And that summarizes our discussion on today's video. Leave your thoughts in the comment section and tell me what you think about the topics that we've presented to you and the various perspectives that you've heard. I will see you in the next video, and please consider liking and subscribing to our channel to become part of our community. Thank you for watching.